Ready to go? Thank you very much for being here for the presentation on fixed income. Can everybody speak German? No? Okay, good. I'm the one who has to speak English. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask in German. If I'm speaking too fast, just raise your hand a little bit and slow down. If you have questions during the presentation, don't hesitate to stop and ask a question as well. Okay? So my name is John Gilardi. I'm with Qiagen. None of you probably know Qiagen in terms of the products we sell and use, but I'll explain it to you. One of the few companies left from the Neue Markt days here in Germany, and actually one of the few success stories of Germany, companies founded in Germany after the Second World War. We'll get into that in a minute here in terms of what we're talking about. So before I start, let me see if this is working. I wanted to give a little credit to people who helped me to put the presentation together. That would be Catherine and Matthew from Deutsche Bank and John Whitaker from JP Morgan. I think one of the messages I'll give you today is if you're an IR, learn debt IR before you have to do this and not learn it on the fly like I had to. It's one of the reasons why I have gray hair. But these guys were instrumental in terms of the two projects we've done in the last year to 18 months at Qiagen, where we've raised over $1 billion in debt markets. So we've done a lot of work in the last 2 years at Qiagen. So I wanted to tell you a story today. Some people have dreams about breakthroughs and creating a new product. And in the case I'm talking about, the guy that's important is this guy here, Metin Kolpan. These two were also founders of the company, but Metin's the most important guy. Turkish immigrant, PhD student at the University of Düsseldorf, and he came up with a process to be able to isolate, purify, and stabilize DNA and RNA proteins, the building blocks of life that are the nucleic acids that are trapped inside cells. Every person, every living organism has DNA or RNA. And up until this process he developed in the 1980s, the process to be able to extract and purify the DNA and get it stabilized was toxic, dangerous, couldn't be reproduced, and in many ways, it was a pure lottery pick if you could do it. So in many ways, he came up with the process to do this. And what he did is, in terms of using filters to be able to do this process, which we now take for granted. So breakthroughs, many people have great breakthroughs. Very few people can take those breakthroughs and turn them into commercial products. But Metin was able to do that, and they started Qiagen. And these are the kits that we sell, these famous blue boxes. If you've ever been in a life sciences lab, talk to people in our area, we have 90% plus unaided awareness. They use our company name as a verb, to Qiagenize a sample. Just as a quick break here, it was 20 years ago today that they arrested O.J. Simpson in Los Angeles with the famous car chase on the highway in the white Bronco. The jury at that time did not believe the DNA evidence against O.J. Simpson because this was all rocket science. They used Qiagen materials. Someone from Qiagen was on the stand for 3 days trying to explain to the jury what DNA analysis was. And now it's all taken for granted. It's part of our lives. This is what you're doing with this molecular technology. And the ability to be able to isolate and purify all goes back to Metin. So out of that breakthrough, they started a company. And here was the first 30 employees. Metin's here, there. This guy is still with the company, and so are these two, 30 years later, almost 30 years later. But this is process that you talk about how you come up with an idea, a commercial product, and you create an enterprise. That's innovation. To be honest, as an American living in Germany now for a long time, this is something that just simply is missing here in Germany, and that's unfortunate. When you have a new company like Qiagen at that time, they have to get external funding, external capital to grow. And this is a standard chart that you see in terms of the life to be able to get to that IPO. You start with angel money, seed capital. This is the valley of death where you think you're not making any money. You think your project's not going to fly. Why did they ever decide to do this? But you need an angel investor. Somebody's going to give you that first money to get into the game. Then you move up different steps in terms of venture capital money, looking at acquisitions, strategic alliances. You're doing mezzanine financing. You're getting bank debt. You're getting people on board. At the end, you finally go for the IPO. In Qiagen's case, that was 1996. Okay? Company went public in the US on NASDAQ because German law was so restrictive and prohibitive at that time that we were not allowed to be able to issue capital to employees in the United States and be a German company. That's why we're a Dutch holding company. And then a year later, the company went public on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, and we're the largest component of the tech DAX now. So that angel investor was this guy, Moshe Alafe, born in Baghdad, emigrated to the United States, science background. And this guy wrote a $1 million napkin, we call it, the $1 million napkin. He's the angel investor. Metten came to Frankfurt here, saw him in person, showed the idea, they talked about it, and he wrote it on a napkin, I'll give you $1 million. Now, that guy has invested in Biogen IDIC now, Applied Biosystems, ABI, which is now Life, which is now part of Thermo Fisher. He was the seed investor in Amgen. And he's seed invested in about 60 companies. This guy is really funny. He's about 85 now. I was with our CEO on the first trip when I joined the company 4 years ago. And we were at the Ritz-Carlton in San Francisco. And he said, wait out here and look for Moshe. And when he comes, make sure you get him into the hotel. And I was like, what are you talking about? Up comes this guy, looked like an elderly man, disheveled shirt, carrying 2 Aldi plastic bags. And the doorman was ready to go, hey, get away. And I was like, dude, stop. That guy's a billionaire with a B. Let him in. And I walked him into the hotel. But Moshe is the guy who gave the money. You need that one guy. And what that did was laid the foundation for the IPO and the foundation for growth. This was our 10-year anniversary listing in New York on NASDAQ. Yeah? And that's our CEO, Per Schatz. He's still with the company. Roland Sackers, the CFO. This is Solveig, who used to be the IR director, and the team. It's one of the few companies. If I ask you how many companies in the DAX index alone were founded after the Second World War, what do you think the guess is?
Some spin-offs, but otherwise not many.
Just SAP, really. Everything else, most of the companies were founded before the First World War. When BASF, I worked there, it's great, 150th anniversary. Bayer, 150th anniversary. But there are very few companies that go through this innovation cycle. Universities spin out, making their way up, and actually becoming a $6 billion industry leader. So that's what I'm talking about with Qiagen. We're the largest biotech company in Europe. We were the few companies that went public that were profitable at the time. We have about $1.3 billion in sales, $6 billion market cap. And we have about 4,000 employees at 20 countries around the world. And again, what we do is biological samples, whether it's blood, hair, tissue, a cigarette, a blood stain in a carpet, water, a bone fragment in a grave. The process of taking that with our machines and our kits, being able to isolate, purify the DNA, and then extract the information. We sell those to about 500,000 customers around the world. So just as a little treat, our products are often on TV. If you watch CSI Miami, Tatort, especially the one in Munster, you'll see our machines in the background. And this is one about our tuberculosis product, and this was a free product placement. Hopefully it'll work.
Dr. Sikora, no craziest thing about that guy you asked me to see. Turns out
Your friend George.
been running this place for a week. Patients already jumping ship. Maybe she'll let me treat
He
him.
was coughing up blood, pulmonary distress. He's been traveling back and forth to Mumbai. They're lousy with TB there.
You think he's got tuberculosis? Why'd you let him leave?
Well, because I left my handcuffs at home this morning. I mean, why did I let him leave? I went to the supply closet to get a PPD, came back to the room, he was gone.
If he's got tuberculosis, then everybody close to him is at risk. His wife, his co-workers, all the passengers on those flights.
Yeah, the health department's gonna want to know about this.
Well, you can't do a skin test if he's gone.
Lesson number 1 for the day. You work in family medicine, you look for other options.
Chest x-ray, that one's out too.
There's a new test, quantiferin TB Gold. Uses blood and you get the results within 24 hours.
Never heard of it.
You better brush up.
So for fun, sometimes we'll watch the TV shows. The Italian CSI, we think that's the best, the way they say Qiagen and talk about the company. It sounds better than in German. So question for you, how many believe the IPO is that final fundraising step in a company's development? How many think yes? How many vote no? I mean, it's kind of a trick question, but the answer is no. It's only really just the beginning. And I worked at Aventis before, and at BASF, and at Novartis. And there we were also doing a lot of debt offerings. And this is something that I challenge people in terms of to learn that side of the IR, because conventionally we think of IR as being equity investors. And actually, I think more and more the debt side of the game is going to become critical for our jobs, and it's going to become critical for your career development as well. So I have 3 messages for you today. One is debt investors are increasingly critical to supporting corporate growth. This is driven by the low interest rate environment. If I'm a CFO right now and I'm looking at issuing equity or looking to raise money in the debt markets, it's a no-brainer to go to the debt markets. Why would I go out and pick up equity at an average cost of capital of 8-9% when I can go out and borrow below 1% right now, without a bond rating, without a credit rating from S&P or Fitch? The second one is stop the IR has to stop the excuses. You'll see some numbers I have from some surveys. 1 out of 3 European companies, debt IR is not done by the IR team. It's done by Treasury, it's done by Finance, another department in the organization, and that's where you see a lot of these disconnects in terms of what equity investors are hearing and what the debt side. The third one is developing these debt skills is critical to your career development. I think it's ever more so in terms of, we talked for years about this intercultural experiences, blah, blah, blah. As an American, I can say that. But I think more and more learning how to talk to debt investors and equity and being able to bridge between these two worlds is going to be one of the key career limitations for people who can't do it, or one of the career key advantages. So there's many ways to raise external capital, just to put us all on the same page. You have these different ways of raising money through debt. And this convertible securities is kind of in a gray zone. Remember, with debt, you're borrowing money, but you're not giving up ownership in the company. And then on the equity side, I can issue common stock or I can issue preference shares. I can borrow money, but I'm giving up ownership stake in the company. The cost still for these is very high. We forget that at times, but I have more flexibility. That's the trade-off. But why would I go out and issue equity at this time when I can borrow money so cheap? I mean, in Europe, we're at negative interest rates now. Yeah? We forget, I think, at times that how high the interest rates were here. If I went the curve, it would be up here. That's why you saw a lot more secondary offerings back a decade ago to 15 years ago. But in this range now, with interest rates here, companies are remiss not to take advantage of the low interest rate environment and go out and pick up debt and move to the long end of the yield curve. That's what we did, and we'll show you some examples. So another point, investors are not always looking for equities. When we go out and look at the total investment class, only about 25 to 30% of total investments, assets under management, are actually going into equities. And actually, the study from McKinsey shows that the share going into equities is going to decline. So this is the environment we're operating in, too, in terms of where we go to raise capital for a company. So corporates are out taking advantage of the low rates. This is some data from Deutsche showing that right now they're looking for more than $1 trillion of investment grade issuance only in dollars alone to happen this year. So we're on track to probably beat 2013 levels. So that's why you see a lot of companies rush into the door, trying to pick up money on the cheap, and then because everybody thought interest rates are going to turn. Because when the rates turn, they're going to turn fast and they're going to turn hard. Yeah? And that's why people are willing to say, oh, God, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? And now the ECB has kind of shocked people again by going lower and signaling they're going lower, even lower. But this is why you see the corporates lining up now to say, I'll just do it now, get rid of the topic, stop trying to time the market. Here's a view of what's happening in Germany. Issuance volumes last year, 2009, was a very strong peak year. But here, 14, they think this could be one of the strongest years since 2009. Hard to beat that year because they had a very strong start to the quarter. But you can see there's a lot of these redemptions coming in Germany where people have to refis. So there's going to be a lot of activity. And right now, we're on track this year, a little bit above 13. So you see a lot of names here: BMW, Volkswagen, ProSieben, Deutsche Bank, Heidelberg Cement. Companies across multiple industries, multiple areas going out and raising money. We're going to talk later about what's called the U.S. private placement market. Anybody do a USPP program? One? What company? Okay. Anybody else do one? Two? What company? Yep. So SAP did one. Stefan down the hall. This is a market where I think more and more German corporates are going to go and play. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So it's about one of the point here is to become much more active in debt offerings, because this is something that concerns me, especially when I was at Novartis. We worked well with the Treasury team, but in many ways they said, hey, this is our chance to talk outside. This is our chance to get a little bit of the glory. And so we had a little bit of some dust-ups to say, hey, no, we have to talk together because we don't want you explaining one thing to debt investors that they're going to get a conflict when they start talking to their internal teams at some of our largest shareholders. Because when I look at some of our largest shareholders, the debt side or convertible bonds or those people are also in the equity. They start talking to each other, they better be triangulated with our story as well. So that's what we're talking about. And also the thing I would say is you in the IR role have much more influence as to how these bonds and the debt instruments are going to be allocated and what stories told and have more control. And that's your job. So first one I say is the excuses I hear is complexity. So debt capital markets, DCM, just far too complex. I learned equity. That's my side. That's what matters. So just as an example, this is a schematic of our convertible bond that we just did. Largest offering in Europe to date this year, $750 million. And I would need probably 10 minutes to explain this transaction into multiple components. So it's an example about IR messaging. The bank came to me in the consortium. I sat in all the meetings, and they said, well, the press release doesn't matter. It's just going to say Qiagen launches $750 million convertible bond. And I said, what are you smoking? If this goes across the tape that way, our share price will be down 10 to 15%. You're raising $750 million. You're going to convert. You're going to put me, and you're going to have equity dilution. What are you guys raising money for? You're going to go war chest? And then I said, no, we're doing a share buyback, guys. We're replacing an existing 2026 note at 3.25% coupon, getting rid of that. Then we are raising only $300 million of cash. And then I had to go and convince the CEO and the board of directors to lay a $100 million share buyback on top, and the share price went up 2%. So these are the kind of things where you and IR, I'm encouraging you to learn this, to get involved, because your equity investors are going to come back and say, what are you doing? Why are you raising money? If you're not doing it already, I'm just urging you to get even more involved. So in terms of a company, going back to that chart I had before, after an IPO, they have different ways of raising money on the DCM side. They can do bank financing with term loans. Revolving credit facilities is where they give you a dispo credit, kind of like your local home bank. They'll come and say, we'll give you $500 million or $1 billion. We have $1 billion line of credit from one Japanese bank. Dirt cheap rates, just there in case we need it for something. But more and more, the financing is not here. It's being done up here in private placement and public bond market. Why do I have to go to Deutsche Bank and pay them the money to do the commercial lending to me when I can go straight to the market? And it goes down much smaller in size of companies. Mueller, you know the yogurt guys? He bought the company. He went out and did a private placement offering too, to raise money for Mueller, because they want to expand. Americans love to eat this rich, creamy yogurt now like we have here, but they don't want the Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt has too much protein, so protein is expensive and it costs too much. So the Mueller yogurt, you know the story? They tell you this? No? So what they do at Mueller is they needed money to expand, but they had to get tanker capacity because they make the yogurt here, put it in big vats, and ship it over to the United States and repackage it there. Company that small. He said, screw it. I'm not raising money here. I'm going to the private placement markets and picking up the money I need there. So you have what's the Europe private placements. We'll talk about that, where you give money to insurance companies. There's a European market for this, especially in France, where you can give money, you can have interactions with insurance companies that are willing to take on the risk. And these are not tradable instruments. You're selling a bond or notes to them, 3, 5, 7, 12, 15 years, and you have to go out and you negotiate with these banks, with the insurance companies through the banks, in terms of there's this kind of created market for the interaction. And then you have your public bond market, where you get into SEC registration bonds. This is what terrifies a lot of people in IR, when you start getting into the arcane SEC regulations and these lawyers start coming in and jawboning you and then pushing people into the corner and taking advantage of them speaking English and try to, intimidation that you get from the usual New York law firms. So this is kind of an overview of the world of bonds, just to kind of give you the schematic view. And JP Morgan put this together. So again, you have your domestic bonds. You have companies that will issue bonds here in Germany, in euros, or in Scandinavia, in their local markets. But then you get into these international bonds. There's the Eurobond market. Some guys, this is called the EMTN market. Then you also have over here where people will, depending on cash flows, to match up cash flows, will go into a foreign market outside of their home country and do bonds to be able to create cash flows and be able to match up cash flow with payments and this sort of thing. So you'll see terms like samurai bonds. This is what you sell inbound into Japan. Yankee is into the US. Bulldog is into Great Britain against the gilt. And then the kangaroo is against the Australian dollar, Aussie dollar. And then down here at the bottom is this arcane world of US bonds, because you get to these SEC registration bonds where you need 2 credit ratings from like Fitch, S&P, or Moody's, and these guys are gangsters because you got to pay them to give you a rating. And just to go back a second, that's why people like this private market, even companies the size of SAP or Daimler, because I don't need to have a credit rating from SAP or Moody's or Fitch and pay these guys. So down here, you see this kind of what they call Rule 144A. And this applies on the equity markets as well as the debt market. It means you're selling securities or debt instruments to what are called qualified institutional buyers. You'll hear this term QIBs. And these are people who are registered with the SEC, professional investors who are able to buy these instruments, without registration with the SEC. You also have what's called Regulation D or Reg D. That's a private placement vehicle. That's what's sold to these insurance companies. We'll get to that in a minute. And then you also have what's called Reg S or Regulation S. This is complex. It's where I sell a bond in US dollars. Information is given to the SEC, but it is not registered, and I cannot sell it to people who are US residents or domiciled in the US. So when we do these we just did a Reg S offering for a convertible bond. The disclaimer was 2.5 pages long. The press release was 1. Okay? And this is what I mean about the intimidation from the lawyers and people getting overwhelmed. The trick here is that most of the US entities who are invested in the debt capital markets have offshore accounts in Ireland, Luxembourg, and places like that in Singapore that they can invest in these offerings. So there's this loophole created to allow them to be able to get into this market. So this is kind of a view of that concept. You have your 144A and register, which I can go around the world, but with Reg S, I have to stay outside of the United States. Even on the Reg S offering, I was not allowed to have any phone conversation with sell-side analysts based in the United States. I could not talk to any buy-side analyst on the equity side based in the United States. I had framework emails that I had to send. I had a lawyer come in and check the phone bank of calls coming in, check my email just to make sure that we had things documented if there was an SEC audit. This is where these guys go overboard. But in this environment now, with the US government, everything has to be ticked and tied. So who's involved in an IPO? A bond offering. This is the issuer. That's you as the company. Your job is to provide the information, to tell the story. I hate the term equity story. I hear that the next time I'm going to kill someone. It's not the equity story. It's the corporate story. Because it's the corporate story I'm telling to multiple stakeholders, and it can't be different. I have to be there to do the due diligence with the banks and with the investors. We have to go out and do roadshows. When you do DCM offerings, you still have to go out and oftentimes do roadshows. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute too. And we take care of all the disclosures, all the press releases that have to go out. You have a DCM team at your bank or your banks that are working together. They're the contact to us. They do the origination work, and they have to take care of us. They're on our side. Because remember, when you're dealing with banks, first question is, what are they doing to screw me? Okay? It's American rule. If I meet a banker, what are you doing trying to make what are you going to take from me? And there are people in the bank who are there to help you, and there are people in the bank who are there to hurt you. Yeah? So you got to understand who's playing. So then you come into the syndicate, and this is where people come together. They're gauging sentiment. They understand the market. They're playing the wall between the two sides and trying to figure out how they're going to bridge this all together. Same kind of concept in an IPO, but they're doing it in a DCM side too. You have the sales guys at the banks. Their job is to get the orders, but their interest is with the investor. It's not with us. So they're going to try and get the yield up as high as possible, the coupon, the interest rate that we have to pay. They're going to try and get it as high as they can to take care of their customer. They're going to talk about what they call the fight to get more for their shareholder, for their customers of the allocation of the bond. Because remember, when you do bond offerings, just like on an IPO, you'll have an oversubscription. You'll hear them talking about, well, it was 3 times oversubscribed. So that's why these guys, they bid high for what they'll take, knowing they may get half or a quarter of it, or they may get 0. And if they get 0 or they don't get the interest rate they wanted, they blame this guy. They don't blame him. They blame this guy. And then you have the investor over here. He's the ultimate buyer of the bond or the notes coming through. He's going to be your future contact from your IR role. They don't go away. He places the orders with the sales guy. He's the guy who does all the work. Key point here, this is not like meeting with a PM who decides, okay, I buy the stocks. These guys, if they want to get into a bond offering or buy bonds in this kind of situation, they have to go to risk committees and they have to push it through. So your story has to be very clear, consistent, and in a packaged way that he can turn around and tell this to a risk committee, and you can get put through. Because the better demand you have, the lower the interest rate you're going to pay. So in terms of pricing and consideration, just a couple points. Who's in charge of setting the volume and the duration? It's a corporate issuer. You as the company determine how much you want to raise from the market and under what terms. 5, 7, 12, 15, 30, how many years do you want to go? How do you want to play the yield curve? This is the CFO. This is what's going to keep him awake during this kind of situation. But who sets the price? The bank syndicate. They set the price. And they come and they'll say to you, here's the price, here are the terms. People want to buy $400 million or $800 million at 7 years, and they'll give you 3.25 or whatever the coupon is that you have to pay. But if you're going to go to 5, and they'll sit there and say, what do you want out of this? This is what we can offer you. And then you start the poker game. And the syndicate is the one who's in the middle trying to play that poker. But how's it set? It's these discussions among all the partners that I showed you. But they're going to look at your credit quality. Again, most of the people going out there do not bother to pay for S&P or Moody's or Fitch ratings anymore. And they want to understand, though, what's your credit rating. And they do that by coming through and kicking the tires. They want to meet management, roadshow, and they're going to pour through your financials. Not your adjusted report results, your reported results. They're going to see what are comparable bonds trading at, and then they're going to see what is the goal you want to raise. Is it too little, too much, in terms of how much money you want to raise, and what are you going to use the proceeds for? What affects the pricing can be the appeal of the corporate issuer, because again, the two things that bond investors worried about is 1, your ability to pay the coupon, the interest rates, and 2, the ability for him to get paid if you go into default. Because remember, a bond investor is getting paid before the equity guy. So he's looking at those two factors. But he wants to understand your underlying corporate story. This is a big misnomer on debt IR, is that people think all they care about is numbers. That's not the case at all. The next thing that's important is down here, what's called structural deal enhancements. These are called often covenants. We'll get that in a minute. They can come and make offers to take your bonds, but they'll put in covenants or structural deal enhancements. They'll say, well, you're not allowed to do a share buyback for the next 18 months, or you're not allowed to have a debt to equity ratio that spikes above 3 times net debt to EBITDA, what they call a turn, 3 turns. Or 4 turns, depending on your industry. And if you have a spike, you got to pay additional interest rates. And you have number of quarters to get it below, or you got to pay us even more. These kinds of covenants they'll put in. They'll put in change of control covenants if they think you're going to get acquired as well. Come on in. Yeah? And this is interesting that they have this right or this ability to dictate the terms. Because remember, when you're negotiating, you're looking at 2 things, value and consideration. So they're putting a price out they're willing to pay in the coupon, how much they'll take, and then they can really dictate on the consideration more than people realize. So I want to show some basics about how bonds get priced. What you start with is the benchmark yield. What's the underlying risk-free return and the ability there? In the US, you're using treasuries. In Europe, you're using the swap rates. And in the UK, you use gilts. So this sets your benchmark. And again, like I showed you, because these are dirt cheap right now, people are willing to pay a couple basis points above that to be able to buy. If you think about an equity investor, he has alpha is his equity index. Then he's looking for beta. No, beta is the market. Alpha is what he's looking to be able to beat that, the spread, to be able to show that he's making money. You have the same concept. The investors in bonds who are buying these are saying, what can I get as a risk-free return? That's his beta. And then his alpha is going to be buying stuff like this, corporates, to show that he can do better with the money and be able to make more money than just buying the market. So this looks complex, and it's actually, hopefully, demystified. The red line is the risk is your risk-free rate, yeah? And then the green line is your swap yield curve. This is your interbank lending rate. And then what you see in the blue line is your pricing. And the difference between these two, expressed in basis points or bips, is what people are going to bid at. And so in pricing, when they're talking about what they're going to buy, they'll say, I'll pay you 100 bips over the 7-year mid-wap, 7-year treasuries, or 125 bips over 10-year treasuries. And I'll take 400 million. And then people, what you get are these grids of prices. And they'll say, no, you're wide of the price. You're wide of the range. The banks will go back and say, no, if you went 10 years, you have to bid 100 bips, not 125. You need to come in close. You need to come inside the ranges because we set marketing ranges for prices. Make sense? So we'll say, we will market a 10-year between 75 and 110 bips above. And that's where we want to get people, and we'll see the demand is. And then you do a Dutch auction in terms of filling the people in. But that's the difference. So that's that spread that everybody's focused on. And that's how they talk about pricing. So again, you have your, for example, here's a 10-year Eurobond at 1.98%. This is the spread that people are paying. And they had to pay a little bit of an extra market because it's a new issue. So you're talking about this minus this gives you the range that people are talking about in terms of pricing. And that's what's, sorry, I think it's my phone, but it's okay. But that's what you're getting in terms of pricing a bond. That's where the difficulty, the jargon could kind of come in. So the second excuse is people say they only care about the numbers. Nothing can be further than the truth in terms of dealing with debt investors. The debt investors I've dealt with have actually been more sharper, understanding of our equity story than the equity guys. Because the equity guys can come in and out, and the bond investor you got for 7, 10, or 12 years. Yeah. So people think it's all about math. It's a joke that I got from one of the bankers when we were doing a convertible bond. He put his finger in his mouth. He was lost after 5 minutes, an equity capital markets guy. There's about 5 people in the world that can do convertible bond math. And this is the excuse. It's just telling the same story. So here's what I see as typical IRO mistakes in dealing with debt investors and feedback I got from different bankers and others. They're telling different stories to equity and debt investors. People go out to their equity investors and say, we want to grow. Here's my growth story, blah, 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 blah. We got this shock as well. We got a real shock, yeah? And then they turn around and say, we're prudent with cash. So they're out there talking like this. And you get zero credibility with both sides. Yeah? Second thing is a lack of debt-focused information. What's your risk management policy? Talk to me about cash flow generation. And what are your treasury M&A policies? What are you going to do with the proceeds? Consistent written policies that you can have the consistent written answers to these 2 types of target groups. And then, like I was saying earlier, you have this topic with covenants. The debt investors will come in and put stuff on top of you that'll infuriate your your equity investors. Why did you agree to that cap? Why did you agree to that cap in terms of leverage that you can't go out and do the big deal that we think you need to grow? And that's where you got to be looking at both sides of the coin. Bring these parts together in the equation and not try to see them as separate. And then the third thing I see is a lot of people call in debt investors only when needed. Yeah? They don't have this cadence of non-deal roadshows, cadence of contact with debt investors that you need. And that's why we try to do with convertible bondholders, especially in Paris, which is a huge convert market, we try to go twice a year to see convert holders. Yeah, because we have now over $1 billion of converts outstanding. And they can trade those. And we also do one in London. We can't do them in the US, the lawyers would kill us. And then also, we make our CEO and CFO available for those calls. So here's the case study. This was a $400 million private placement offering that we did in August of 2012. Came right after the Q2 results. And we were sitting around, and the CFO was like, this isn't going to be that hard. He'd never done one either. He was like, it's not going to be that much work. My God, we lost 3 weeks. We all lost our summer vacations working on it. It wasn't like we were scrambling, but it was just so much work. And there's more work to these for IR than people realize. So first thing you're doing is you're picking out what's the currency you're going to do this in. Dollars, euros, or another currency in terms of where your cash flows are coming. We are a US dollar-based reporting company. Half our business is in dollars. We wanted more dollars, so we did in dollars. You got to decide how much, deal size. What's the best amount? We had a fixed interest loan rolling off, and we wanted to go out and raise about half to pay off that and a little bit more money just to fill up the war chest. But we said 400 was enough that we could fill up the war chest a bit, but not alienate and irritate our equity investors. Oh my God, they're getting ready for another deal and destroy value. So you have a syndicate. In our case, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, 2 of our house banks. The other 2 house banks are Goldman and Barclays. But we decided to only go with 2. On our recent convertible bond, we actually went with 4. So that's where your bankers get involved, and you have different teams coming in. So you got to think a lot about timing. I don't know what your experience was at Daimler, but you have to figure out what is the competition. The banks will help you decide, are there a lot of deals trying to come into the market? That's going to cost you a higher coupon because people have better choice among the products out in the market. You also, though, want to avoid when there's going to be monetary policy meetings or there's going to be a big macro issue that's affecting interest rates because people don't want to tie down their money. So you're looking for these periods when you can kind of go into the market, get in there, and get out. The other thing that's important here in terms of timing is remember that these insurance companies and these funds, they get the money and have to invest it. There's this routine flow of money coming in. Also, what's important is maturity. You want to figure out how far out the yield curve you want to be going to get interest rates. Is the yield curve flattening out or is it getting more steep? And this is where you have those negotiations with the banks. So in this case, we're selling to private placement investors, our insurance companies in the United States. Northwestern Mutual, AIG, MetLife, New York Life, ING, Prudential. These are big names that you see also on the equity side. You're dealing with very specific detailed teams inside those insurance companies, and there are 3 tiers that you're looking at. These large majors like Northwestern or MetLife, New York Life, they can take 50 to 150 million of an offering. The smaller ones can take obviously a little bit far less than that. But you have to go out, and there's this syndicate that they reach out to these guys, and there's this special network of people that they learn to offer to each other. So this market here is about a $60 billion placement market a year. Right now, only about 5% of all the placements are coming out of Germany. But Daimler did one, SAP did one, Mueller did one, we did one, Wacker Chemie did one. So you're going to start to see more and more German companies get into this market because you can get very attractive pricing, very attractive interest rates, raise money in dollars, and it's a very quick and efficient, non-registered, non-SEC process. So what's the work for the IR guy? A lot more than people realize. Because the first thing is you have to write what's called a private placement memorandum. This is kind of a prospectus type thing, 50, 60 pages about the company. Description, risk factors. We're lucky as an SEC registrant. We have our 20F filing that we could take a lot of stuff. But we had to go back and rewrite, big sections of this to make it even more, go through and fact check it and put graphics in, that sort of thing. The second thing that's written is what's called a note purchase agreement, NPA. That's for the lawyers and the treasury team to write, a technical jargon. Then we had to come up with a roadshow deck. But it wasn't your typical equity investor deck that you use to explain the company to people who already know your company. We had to go back and start from first stone and explain the entire company, market dynamics. And this is where we had some pretty intense meetings. I had to go back and explain markets, size, development, historical trends, future trends. That was about 60 slides in that investor deck that we had to pull together. Then you go out and you start your marketing during this process. And again, we had to go out and do roadshows, video conferences, phone calls. We'll get to that in a minute. And then you do what's called the circling. This is the pricing. The circling is the pricing. And I sat at the table on those calls because we were going through the bond allocation. And there were certain people that we liked on the roadshow and certain people we didn't like. And they said, nah, I don't want to have to deal with that guy anymore. You know, he has too many, he made our life miserable. He's going to be calling us every 2 weeks. You know, or then we were starting to see accounts here on this list that are nice equity holders. And we said, we want to take care of friends and family. Yeah? So that's where you can have a role there at the table. And then you set the price and the coupon and you just issue a short release. This is also IR work. These people will come to your site. I don't know if they came at Daimler, but they came and they spent a day at our offices in Washington, D.C. We had to create an investor day for these guys to go around, kick the tires, learn the company, and buy them a steak dinner. So this process, though, can take 6 to 9 weeks to get done.
Is it the process time you had with your project?
This is standard process time. You can do it. You can do it a little bit faster, but most Europeans they can take longer. We started in first week of August, and we circled that week, and we delayed payout till October because you can also set when you want the payout.
This is pretty fast.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of U.S. PP market because we can also go back and do what's called a rubber band. They have all this debt market jargon. We can go back and take the original purchase price memorandum, PPM, update some numbers. It's called putting a rubber band in and say, good, we want some more money. And go out to the same people and pull more money. So this is like what a roadshow looks like. Sunday through Friday, 5 days, 4 hotels, 9 flights, 10 cities, 50 investor contacts. So this was a corporate jet trip. We started in New York, and I remember JP Morgan had to move the room 3 times because they underestimated how many people would turn up, and we had to keep moving to a new room. And my CFO, I love him, he's a great guy, but we got in the car after that first meeting, and he started bitching and moaning and complaining. And I said, look, we got 3 days living together 24/7. You got to get over this. You know, we're going to make it. If you get through the day, I'll buy you a steak dinner. And he agreed, and then everything got better. Because then we went from there to Hartford. Big insurance capitals of the country are Hartford and Des Moines are the 2 primary markets for insurance. Then from Hartford, we went down to Philadelphia. There's some key accounts in Philadelphia. Spent one night in Charlotte. Then we went to Cincinnati. You do a lot of meetings at airports, actually physically at the airport. I don't know what your experience was. Did you just say, no? You guys didn't go to? Yeah. What? Yeah, we were on a deal. So you're on a deal. So we were actually doing things at the airport. And then we flew here to Des Moines. Mitt Romney was, we were across the street from Mitt Romney's hotel during the campaign. And so we should have gotten him to buy some. And then from there, we were in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is also an important insurance company. What's funny about the United States, each religion has their own insurance company. Yeah? The Mormons have their own. It's called Rosenthal. The Catholics have Knights of Columbus. And then the Lutherans have, it's called, I forget the name. They just changed the name. They each have their own insurance company as their captive insurance. So we had to go up and see them. Milwaukee is Northwestern Mutual. And then we had to go down to Chicago and see some insurance companies here. And then we went to Washington and finished up with one there and did video conferences. So it's an intense, it feels like you're doing an equity IPO when you're out on the road doing these types of offerings. So moving on to the last point is developing the debt IR skills is critical to your career development. So this really shocked me when I saw this out of the Kepler survey that showed 1 out of 3 European companies, treasuries taking care of IR. I don't know what people think about that, if there are any views in the room, because this is where I want to see this number should be like 60, 70, 80%. Shared responsibility. It's not going to be that the IR team alone is doing it. I don't think that's the right way. It has to be a shared responsibility with the treasury guys because they're the experts. They're closer to the funding, financing needs. Yeah? I take our treasury guy out on the road for us to see equity investors so that we can synchronize stories, that we're on the same page. And then we go do converts together because sometimes he'll be on the phone now and then with one of our convert holders alone, talking through some arcane thing in the back on page F57 of our 20F. But this is the number that I would like to see grow. I don't know how people feel about it. Anybody share views? But this is where I see a clear and then this blows my mind. At 17%, I'm sorry, you have large cap companies, they don't even address the topic. Yeah? This number should be like 80, 90% shared responsibility. And this creates the bitching and moaning and fighting between the teams inside the companies. And this here, you know, the IR team's not involved. This is bad news. Because your equity investors are debt investors. Yeah? This is a chart I took from JP Morgan from our bond offering. We were talking about a convertible bond. And you can see big names that are also debt investors and equity. Yeah? Susquehanna was the biggest guy who pulled the biggest slug out of our convertible bond. Yeah? Or Amundi in Paris. They have more invested in our convertible bond than they do straight outright equity. Yeah? So these guys are starting to come more and more to sit at the table in the meetings with us, with the equity guys working more and more. There's more convergence inside the banks. I don't know if anybody else is seeing a trend, but it's something we see as a very decent-sized mid-cap company. And also, you're going to have certain hedge funds. Yeah, this is something you need to watch out too, because these guys like Oaktree, Oxif, D.E. Shaw, Citadel, these are guys who are going to play in your equity and your debt side to make money. Yeah, and again, it's not just equity IR. If you do that, you're really missing out on the skill set and the fun of the job. Because these are the golden rules that I had to write when I was at BASF. We did the One Voice policy back in 1998, and we were teaching them about what the 5 golden rules. Everything you say is public. Know your audience. This is IR 101. All of it applies to equity and debt investors. We don't treat debt investors any different than equity investors. We'll sit in meetings with debt investors and they'll say, yeah, but we're allowed to take material non-public information. We can say, and we're like, no. We treat you the same as a equity investor. Yeah? Because we get those requests all the time from people who want to buy bonds from us, even converts. We want the numbers for the next quarter. We just say, forget it. You're nuts. So this is why we treat equity and debt investors on the same page. Because what I see is this gives us consistency to all stakeholders. One of the reasons I took the job at Qiagen is that it was the first chance that I saw a nice-sized company where you could bring IR, PR, internal comms, government affairs together in one team and be able to drive those core messages through different channels to different stakeholders out the back end. And then use that chart, put debt investors in there as a group we're reaching too. Because that's where some people say equity investors, debt guys can take care of treasuries. But again, what I was saying before is we're looking for complete consistency of messaging that was telling to our customers, employees, competitors, payers, the people, regulators who approve our products. Yeah? So this is where I see the biggest disconnect area sometimes when I look at companies. Going back to what I was saying before. People go out and they downplay growth opportunities to debt investors. Oh, we're very conservative. M&A strategy is very sound and deliberate, blah, blah, blah. And then they go out and meet with the equity guy and they start talking like gunslingers about wanting to go pull the trigger on big deals. And this is where, for our experience, we've brought the story much more to a harmonious balance in the middle between addressing equity and debt needs. And it's kind of toned us down, tamed us down in terms of what we say to the equity guys, but we found that we could push it a little bit more on the debt guys in terms of our growth prospects without creating danger in terms of what we had to pay on coupons, because we talk a lot more about cash flow generation. Yeah? We've rounded out our story. Also, these debt investor views are essential to the IR strategy. I feel like it's missing if it's not part of it. Because what you're trying to do is get market feedback. And if I don't have market feedback from the debt side to give to our CEO, CFO in terms of determining business strategy, then we're missing part of the coin. You know, I'm only getting one side of the coin. And that's why it's important for us when we're thinking about doing deals or transactions or corporate actions, we're always saying, okay, well, how are the debt guys going to react to this? What is the debt environment going to think? What could we do here? How is this going to help us or hinder us in terms of future financing needs? Because I'll tell you, at these interest rates, we'd be stupid to go out and borrow, to issue equity. That affects our positioning, like I said, bringing it more to the middle, and then being able to drive that message into the market. In terms of the last slide, this is about my concept that I teach to my teams is about being a business partner, because if you think about it, that's what we are in an IR communications functions, is an internal business partner. And this is from the book, The Trusted Advisor, that's adapted for a communications environment. What I see is a lot of people who work at IR, PR, these process experts. Here's the press release written by the agency. It's ready to go. Just put it out on PR Newswire or press a text or whatever, and just send it out. Don't change the comma. This is no fun. That's no fun. You're not creating value for the company. It's not a fun job. But you see, at times, people with this kind of role in an organization. The next step up is what I call a technical expert. Make these slides with these messages. Write the press release that says these points. Fill in this. And you go and you're just kind of a tactical implementer. The next level is where a lot of people are operating. And this is where what I call the green zone, where you would want to be. This is the functional expert. Develop the communications plan for this deal. We're going to buy company X. Take care of the internal, external communications. What's our strategy going to be? Blah, blah, blah. But then there's this larger level, trusted advisor. What do you think of this deal? How do you think the market will react to this financing? Where it goes from people telling you things, instead they start shifting to asking you things. And I think that's my value proposition or call to action, is that when IR people can learn more about this side of the game, they're going to be taken more seriously by the treasury teams inside the finance organizations and by the CEO and CFO, because you're able to participate in those conversations and be able to get more input and create value for the company. But I think you're going to get more satisfaction out of the job. It's breaking through the jargon barrier. It's learning to just understanding that side of the game, because that's going to help you to become a much more valuable contributor to the organization. So I'd say, in summarizing up, again, debt investors, debt markets are increasingly critical to driving growth. I would bet companies are so much more likely to be doing offerings in the debt market than equity. And that's what corporates and your equity investors, again, are also often invested in debt. And look for that convergence between what's happening in the debt and the equity side of your business. Number 2 is time to become a keen player in these debt offerings. I'm not talking about wrestling it away from Treasury. I'm talking about becoming a team, a stronger team, a more coherent, consistent team together. This isn't rocket science. It's about relationship management. And that's the skills that IR people, that's what you bring to it. That's what Treasury people don't have. And that's where I really encourage you to say, this is the value proposition, relationship management, telling the story, consistency in messaging. Doing that will reduce the coupon or your interest expenses because people will better understand. There'll be more attention, more demand for the paper that you're offering. And again, make it part of your IR mandate. Build those strong links to the Treasury team. The third thing I say is developing these IR skills is critical to your career development. Just like some people say IR people have to learn to do corporate comms, you see more fusion or combination of IR and PR functions together. I'd say this is what I see as important is that people have to be able to come and show that they can do the debt side of the game as well. And so the time to do it is now. When you're not in an offering, take the time to learn it before the next offering. Developing those skills during an offering like I faced is really painful, yeah? And developing that is going to make you that stronger business partner. So thanks a lot, and see if there are any questions. Sure.
For me, it looks like if a company decides to issue a bond, then it also needs some adjustment in the organization. That means if you have an IR department, either you learn the skills you have to know, or if you have a treasury department, you have to take care that they really communicate very closely, because it has a direct impact on your market cap, and direct impact on your cost of equity, your cost of funds you raise via bond. So because I don't see very often that people realize when you issue a bond, they say, okay, we issue a bond, but internally you have to do a lot of efforts to fulfill the requirements to be efficient.
That's where I would, in our situation, Treasury, I go and grab the guy by the hand. I take him along on equity roadshows. I would encourage you people to consider taking your Treasury guy along on an equity roadshow that he can hear those kind of discussions. And then talk to him about, hey, your work you're doing in Treasury is influencing our share price, our cost of capital, the interest expenses that we have. We have to be able to come up with a coherent way. But in the end, I think what helps is to have a CFO who understands that. But that gets back to what we were talking about before about that business partner, that people start to appreciate and understand what you're doing and start to build that functional expertise.
Have you been, or the CEO, CFO, been aware of the additional efforts and costs in advance?
Through these offerings? Oh, yeah. But I would say when we created the core team around it, the project was given to the treasurer, and to me, together as a team. It wasn't one underneath that. We were in the boat together. Yeah, and that's where you have to have personal chemistry in a team. But to build that chemistry to help him understand, because to be honest, the Treasury guys, they see this as a chance to get outside, a little bit of limelight. They get to go near Wall Street. They get to, it's sexy and exciting for these guys. Yeah, and that's where we brought him in, and we've actually rounded him out more that way.
So the Treasury guy did join you on the roadshow, right?
On these roadshows for the bonds, absolutely. He did. Yeah, he was working. Yeah, but when I go out and do non-deal roadshows to equity investors, I take him along.
It's him alone.
No, he comes with me.
Okay.
Yeah, he comes with me to do, when we go and see equity-only investors, I take him along. Because he's got to learn to stop talking to jargon and all this jingly joke and then start to learn to tell stories. But when we were on the road here, it was the CFO, the treasurer, and me.
Another question, John. I think you mentioned a couple of times that during the deal, banks try to screw you, basically.
Yeah, parts of the bank.
So, but should you do, or shouldn't you create some more competition among competing banks for the deal in the first place, and then select the best offering, say, look guys, this is our standard documentation, either you take it or leave it. We have a specific range in mind in terms of spread, take it or leave it, and then you narrow down the number of banks, and then it's maybe in the last game play between 2 or 3 banks, and then choose the one.
It's a good question. You are never, as a company, going to be able to say, this is what I'm willing to pay, because you don't have your finger as a corporate on the pulse of the market. That's where the relationships come through as a long time. In this case, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, they've been house banks for 15 years. Goldman Sachs took Qiagen public 20 years ago. To your point, what was interesting is when we did the convertible bond, we took in 4 banks for a consortium. This is huge. And this was like, we were thinking, oh my God, what are we doing, you know? And the CFO, Roland Sackers, he was clever. He said to them, okay, this is how you're gonna get paid at the end of the deal. Because on a convertible bond, banks make a lot of money. On these private placements, banks don't make much. They make a couple $100,000. But on a convertible bond, they make tens of millions of dollars. So he said, we are going to pay you on how well you play together. So that's our new pricing model to the banks to pay them, is we say, we're going to pay you as to how you work together as a team, and not who get us the best yields or got us the best customers, blah, 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 because that's what creates that internal tensions inside these syndicates. And we said, we're going to treat you like kindergarten kids, you know? And we're going to say, if you get along and you play well and you play nice with each other, you all get paid equally. If you try to screw each other, you're going to get less than the others, because we'll see it. And all of them.
As an issue, you want to have the lowest coupon possible, right?
Yeah, but these guys on the other side of the fence, you know, we've done it enough now that we can see where the banks are. We do come with our ideas and say, guys, we're only paying this. And that's our poker hand, that we can say, well, we'll pull the offering, or we'll pull the, but you know, you can't switch banks, but we'll pull the offer, or we will reduce the tranche size so you make less money as the bank. But this side of the bank is separated from that side of the bank. That's that internal relationship inside the bank. So that's where it's a poker game. But to try and go to dictate to the bank the terms that you think you're going to get is, I saw, for example, in one offering, the bank came in and they said, this is what we think the range is going to be. It was a bait and switch. They came back and said, no, the range has changed, and now you're way out. You know, those ranges are way wider out here now. We're like, come on, you know, are we dumb or stupid? So banks will watch it there because they don't want to burn long-term relationships. But what we've taken as a pricing model is to say, we expect you to get the most efficient prices for us, but we're going to pay you as to how well you collaborate together as a team. That's the trick we've tried, and it worked. Any questions, further stuff?
Maybe just one
Sure.
more. Do you monitor your fixed income investors on a certain day?
We do. The guy in Georgetown sitting in the room, he sees money because in terms of a convert holding analysis. We do surveys now and then through the banks as to who's holding our converts. The banks have very detailed information as to who's holding converts, and they can see where where the flow is in the movement. On private placements, you cannot sell these instruments, so we know exactly who has how much. And for example, now and then we'll make an announcement about an acquisition or something that sounds awesome to equity investors, and then I'll get an email ping from a bond investor or a private placement investor or from a convertible bond holder, and I'll get on the phone and have to calm the guy down. So we know who our private placement guys are. We go to see them twice a year. We do a telephone call with them, a chance to just catch up on the phone. But again, going back to what I said before, they're worried about our ability to pay the coupon and what they're going to get in terms of a default after they've made the investment. And we keep that relationship, again, going with them in case we need to do what's called the rubber band again, that we need to go back and pick up funds quickly. And we can go back and say to them, hey, you know the story. We want to be able to pick up X hundred million. You know, help us be able to pick something up out of the market. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions, comments? So I hope that was useful. And don't be afraid of debt IR. Okay, thanks.